When Shedeur Sanders broke down on the podium, it wasn't weakness. It was the release of months of restraint. He had held it in through coaching conflicts, locker room tension, and private emotional battles few knew he was fighting. The post-game moment wasn't planned, it was necessary. Sanders detailed the spiritual attacks he felt, the mental toll of being misunderstood, and the quiet strength it took to keep going. What emerged was a young quarterback unafraid to speak about what most athletes bury. That kind of transparency doesn't just shift narratives, it defines legacies. Sanders wasn't asking for sympathy. He was showing growth. His acknowledgement of Stefanski's change in approach, the healing of that relationship, and the support of friends like Quinn Sean revealed a framework of resilience. His final drive wasn't a comeback.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
It was a confirmation. This isn't just a player surviving pressure. It's a leader emerging from it, reshaped by honesty and hardened by trials, ready to redefine what it means to lead in the NFL. You knew something was off when Shedeur Sanders stepped up to the mic after the Browns' emotional win over the Bengals. He wasn't hyped. He wasn't smug. He was raw. Eyes low, voice shaking, and no rehearsed answers. He let it all out. Not just about the game but everything he'd been carrying behind the scenes. The kind of weight that doesn't show up on the stat sheet. He didn't talk about yards or touchdowns first. He talked about spiritual warfare. About the devil trying to get to him through the people around him. Not metaphorically. He said it outright. He talked about being under attack, not just as a quarterback but as a person, as a man trying to hold himself together under pressure that had nothing to do with footballs or playbooks. Match. And then he turned the conversation toward the game. That final drive. The one that sealed the win. He admitted he wasn't locked in during the first half. His mind was somewhere else. Buried under everything he'd been feeling, alone, misunderstood, overlooked. But in that locker room at halftime, something shifted. His teammates snapped him out of it. It wasn't yelling or hype. It was presence, support. They reminded him who he was. They brought him back. So when he stepped on the field for that final drive, it wasn't just a game. It was a battle for himself. A test of who he was becoming. He moved with calm, focused energy. Every pass, every read, every decision, it all felt different. Not because the play calling changed but because Kevin Stefanski didn't duck the questions. He acknowledged the evolution. All season, his relationship with Shedeur had been distant at best, tense at worst. Sanders had felt disrespected. Unheard. Like he was being coached but not understood. But Stefanski finally opened up. He admitted they had a real conversation during the week. One that peeled back the layers and got to the truth neither of them wanted to say out loud. The coach had to own his part too. That maybe he hadn't handled Sanders the way a rookie quarterback going through that kind of pressure needed to be handled. And maybe it was time to stop treating him like just another roster name and start treating him like the leader he was showing he could be. That breakthrough bled into Sunday. Stefanski coached differently. There was less tension, more trust. You could see it in how he let Sanders take command late in the game. No micromanaging. No second guessing. Just letting him lead. Because at that point, Stefanski finally saw it. Sanders wasn't just trying to win a football game, he was fighting to keep himself afloat through something much bigger. And that final drive? Stefanski stepped back. Let Sanders read the field, take his shots, move the chains. The connection between coach and quarterback wasn't perfect, but it was finally human. Respect was starting to replace resentment. That conversation they had during the week, that was the turning point. Shedeur said it changed everything. He'd been holding so much in, trying to stay professional while feeling personally attacked. That talk gave him permission to be real. To explain where he was mentally and spiritually. It wasn't about asking for sympathy. It was about being seen. And Stefanski saw him. Really saw him. Not just the quarterback in a jersey but the person. The guy fighting his own mind, his own doubts, while trying to carry a franchise's expectations on his back. Sanders didn't hold grudges. He said he was grateful. Grateful that his coach was finally willing to meet him where he. The Bengals game wasn't an outlier, it was the culmination. A season full of frustration, confusion, and whispers about third-string status suddenly made sense. Sanders had been grinding through things most fans never even knew about. Not just the mental toll of being doubted, but the spiritual toll of trying to find clarity in a system that didn't fully support him. Through all the messy play calls, quiet sidelines, and unanswered questions, he never quit. He absorbed it. He learned. And when the moment came, Down by 4 under 2 minutes, he delivered. Not because he was having the best statistical game but because he was ready mentally. That drive was the exclamation point to a season-long sentence. Back at the podium he got emotional. Talked about how hard it was just to wake up some days. How the pressure to always be on, while internally spiraling, nearly broke him. But he didn't break. He leaned on his faith. On his brothers in the locker room. On people like Quinn Sean, who didn't just text encouragement but showed up at his door when things got dark. He said Quinn walked in, spoke life into him, prayed with him, and reminded him of who he was outside the uniform. That kind of brotherhood, that's what kept him upright. Sanders made it clear, football didn't save him. People did. Real people who cared about his soul, not just his stats. Throughout the season, the story behind the scenes was just as important as anything on the field. The throws, the runs, the sacks, they were just chapters in a larger narrative of survival. From getting bumped to third-string status, to practicing with people who didn't speak to him, to trying to lead without feeling like he belonged, it was all part of a spiritual test. He framed it exactly like that. Spiritual warfare. A phrase that doesn't usually get airtime in a post-game presser, but Sanders didn't hold back. He said it was real. That the enemy wasn't always obvious. Sometimes it looked like silence from coaches. Sometimes, it felt like isolation in a crowded room. And yet, every game he suited up and led anyway. On the practice field he kept showing up. Even when it felt pointless. Even when the game plan didn't seem built for him. He stayed sharp, knowing his shot would come. And when it did, like in the Bengals game, he made sure everyone knew he wasn't lucky, he was prepared. That preparation wasn't just physical. He trained his mind. Took accountability for the mental lapses and tried to get stronger. That's what made his final drive so powerful. It wasn't just execution, it was redemption. All that quiet effort finally turned into something. And then there were the weeks where he wasn't even playing. Just standing on the sideline watching others take reps he felt he'd earned. That's where the real battle happened. The silent fight with ego, self-worth, and patience. It's easy to lead when the spotlight's on you. It's harder when you're left in the shadows. But he used that time to reflect. To rebuild mentally. He said it gave him perspective. That not playing showed him how much he still needed to grow, not just as a player but as a man. And when he finally got another shot, he didn't lash out. He led with grace. Shedeur didn't sugarcoat anything. He said the lows weren't just professional, they were deeply personal. The isolation didn't end when he left the facility. He'd go home with it. Sit in silence. Question everything. He spoke about feeling like the world was watching him fail before he even got a real chance to show what he could do. He didn't name names. He didn't take shots. But his words painted a clear picture of a young man who felt boxed in, judged for what people thought he should be instead of who he was actually becoming. For a rookie, that kind of self-awareness was startling. And for a franchise, it should have been a wake-up. Stefanski, for his part, didn't deflect. He said the moment Shedeur opened up to him one-on-one, something clicked. The tension that had built up through miscommunication and assumptions finally broke down. What Stefanski saw wasn't just a quarterback, it was a guy trying to find peace. And that changed how he approached coaching him. Stefanski admitted he had been guarded, probably too rigid. The trust wasn't there. But after that talk it shifted. He started seeing Sanders not as a problem to manage but as a potential cornerstone to build. Sanders said that moment of being heard gave him fuel. He didn't want to prove anyone wrong anymore. He wanted to prove to himself that he could lead. He said that was his focus, being a leader even when it felt like the odds were stacked against him. During the post-game interview he kept circling back to brotherhood. How the team started feeling more like a family again. How people like Quinn Sean didn't just check on him when the lights were bright, but showed up when it was silent. That kind of loyalty? It made the difference between breaking and bending. Sanders made it clear this season wasn't just about football. It was a crash course in mental toughness. Every time he was benched, doubted, or misunderstood, he had to decide, would he let it define him or refine him? And game by game he chose to grow. The stats didn't always tell the full story but the moments did. A late fourth-quarter scramble. A sideline huddle where he lifted teammates' spirits. A calm presence when things were spiraling. He built credibility through those moments, not by demanding it but by earning it. That developing relationship with Stefanski wasn't just coach to player anymore. It was man-to-man. Stefanski began listening more, and Sanders started speaking up in ways that actually landed. The communication wasn't always perfect, but it was finally honest. Sanders didn't need coddling. He needed clarity. And when Stefanski gave him that, when he gave him space to lead, it unlocked something. You could feel it in the huddle, in how the team responded, in how the mood on the sideline shifted. The culture started to bend in his direction. Looking at the season as a whole, it was chaotic. Losses that shouldn't have happened. Games where the coaching felt disconnected. Moments where the locker room energy was flat. But through it all, Sanders quietly became the glue. Even when he wasn't playing, he was watching, learning. And when he got back on the field, that wisdom showed. He wasn't flustered. He wasn't trying to prove a point. He just handled business. His calmness under pressure gave the team a new identity, one that wasn't built on flash but on. Being sidelined wasn't just a professional setback, it was a personal reckoning. Sanders said there were days when he questioned why he was even there. Not because he didn't believe in himself, but because it felt like the people around him didn't. That space gave him time to get brutally honest with himself. Was he going to fold under resentment, or rise through reflection? That's when he leaned into his faith, into the people who kept reminding him of his purpose. Not fans, not media, but teammates and a few close voices who never let him forget the bigger. Even in those weeks without game reps, he attacked practice like it was Sunday. Every throw, every drill, he treated it like a stage. And it paid off. By the time he got his moment again, he didn't look rusty. He looked ready. That discipline didn't come from needing to impress. It came from a deeper desire to be prepared. He didn't want a moment to come and catch him unready. So he stayed sharp, stayed steady. And when Stefanski finally put the game in his hands, he didn't hesitate. Match. That's what made the Bengals win so personal. It wasn't just a comeback on the scoreboard. It was a comeback for his whole season. The final drive felt like a release, of frustration, of doubt, of everything that had been weighing him down for months. He controlled the tempo, read the defense, made the right calls. It was poise, not panic. Confidence, not ego. That moment wasn't built in that game, it was built in every unseen moment leading up to it. And everyone watching knew it. By the end of the post-game press conference, Shedeur had said more about mental health and spiritual resilience than most NFL players do in a full season. He didn't hold back. He said this year showed him what kind of man he was becoming. And that meant more than anything happening between the goalposts. He thanked the people who stood by him even when he wasn't the starter. He made it clear he wasn't finished. This wasn't the climax of his story. This was just the start. He'd weathered the storm. And now he was building something that could last. He looked different after that game too. His press conference wasn't about scheme or execution. He talked about growth. About how sometimes the hardest part of coaching isn't drawing up plays, it's recognizing when you've misunderstood someone. He admitted he hadn't always handled things right with Shedeur. There had been tension, missed signals, and moments where he fell back on his instincts instead of adapting to what this particular quarterback needed. But he didn't sound defensive. He sounded reflective. That conversation with Shedeur had opened his eyes, and what he saw now wasn't just potential, it was. Sanders echoed that energy. There wasn't bitterness in his voice. No, I told you so. He spoke with calm, measured clarity. Like someone who had made peace with the chaos and came out of it more grounded. He gave credit where it was due, thanking his coaches, his teammates, and the people who kept showing up for him off the field. He didn't shy away from the darker parts, though. He said there were nights he sat in his room wondering if this was all a mistake. If he was cut out for it. If the pressure would ever lift. But every time he came close to breaking, someone pulled him back. That was the part he kept repeating. He didn't do this. You could feel the shift in the locker room too. This wasn't the same Browns team that stumbled through the early season. They were bruised, sure, but they weren't broken. And a big reason for that was Shedeur. His attitude had started to rub off. Guys were playing harder, rallying together, stepping up for each other. There wasn't that fractured energy anymore. The noise from the outside didn't matter as much. Because inside they had something to hold on to, real belief forged in. Looking back, those weeks on the sideline were almost a gift. They forced Shedeur to learn patience, to become a student again. He said it gave him perspective. Not everything needed a reaction. Not every setback required a statement. Sometimes the best answer is silence and preparation. That's what he leaned into. He'd journal. He'd pray. He'd study film like a backup who knew he'd only get one shot and needed to make it count. And when that shot finally came, he didn't flinch. Because mentally he'd already been through worse than any defensive front. The bond with Stefanski is still a work in progress. But now at least there's a foundation. One built not on mutual obligation but mutual recognition. Stefanski admitted he learned something from Shedeur, not about football but about leadership under pressure. And Shedeur? He said he respects Stefanski for having that conversation. For seeing him. For meeting him as a man and not just managing him like a name on a depth chart. That kind of shift doesn't just affect one player. It shifts an entire organization's tone. You can trace that tone through the rest of the season. The games didn't suddenly become blowouts, but they became battles that felt winnable. And when Shedeur was under center, they had clarity. He wasn't scrambling to impress. He was guiding, reading, leading. Every snap told the story of a player who didn't get here by hype, who wasn't carried by headlines. He got here by staying the course, by trusting the process even when it didn't seem to trust him back. And that showed in practice too. Guys started listening when he spoke. He wasn't barking orders, he was speaking from experience. Real experience. Not just reps but life. Feeling. That carries weight in a locker room. Shedeur said it himself. Leadership isn't loud. It's consistent. It's showing up when it's inconvenient. Staying humble when you have every reason not to be. And treating people with respect even when you're the one being overlooked. That final drive against the Bengals? It wasn't just his breakout moment. It was the moment everyone else finally caught up to what he already knew about himself. That he could lead a team. That he could manage pressure. That he could elevate the people around him even when things were falling apart. The confidence on that drive wasn't forced. It came from reps. Mental, emotional, spiritual. He said afterward that everything slowed down. Not because the defense got worse but because he got better at handling the moment. That's the kind of development you can't coach. Stefanski knew it too. You could see it in his posture on the sideline. He didn't intervene. He didn't hover. He let it happen. Trusted his quarterback to lead. That's a rare moment of growth, for both of them. Afterward, Stefanski said it was one of the proudest moments of his season. Not because of the win but because of the growth he saw from Shedeur. The poise. The command. And more than anything, the way he carried the emotional weight without letting it crush him. Shedeur ended his post-game comments with something that hit deeper than any highlight. He said this season wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving to himself that he could survive the fire and come out better. He said he still has work to do. Still learning. Still growing. But now he's not afraid of the pressure anymore. Not afraid of being doubted. Because he knows what he's built on. And it's not hype. It's not headlines. It's faith, resilience, and the people who never stopped believing in him. He looked right into the cameras and thanked the fans who stuck with him. Said their support meant more than they'll ever know. And then he smiled, for the first time all night. A real smile. Not the forced kind. The kind that says, I'm still here. I made it through. And I'm just getting... There was one moment in that press conference where the room went completely silent. A reporter asked Shedeur what kept him going when everything around him was falling apart. He paused. Looked down for a second. Then he said, I didn't want to let the darkness win. That wasn't about football. That was about life. About the pressure that builds when you're carrying expectations from a city, a franchise, a legacy, and still trying to figure yourself out in the process. He admitted he didn't always know how to handle it. But he found a way. Not through ego or performance but through honesty and connection. Stefanski followed that with his own version of a confession. He said coaching Shedeur taught him something he didn't expect to learn this season. That not every player responds to the same blueprint. That sometimes the most talented guy on the roster needs something more than structure. He needs trust. It was a small statement but it said everything. This wasn't just a quarterback adjusting to the NFL. It was a coach learning how to lead differently. With more empathy. With more awareness. That's rare in this league. But it might be what saves this team. Shedeur said this chapter of his career taught him how to be okay with not being okay. How to ask for help. How to admit when something isn't right without seeing it as weakness. That's what makes him different. Not just the talent but the willingness to evolve, even when it's uncomfortable. He closed out by saying that the win against the Bengals wasn't just about standings. It was a symbol. Proof that he's not just surviving, he's growing. And that now, with the right conversations happening and the right people around him, he's ready to take this even further. There's still a long road ahead. One game doesn't rewrite a whole season. But it does send a message. That Shedeur Sanders isn't going anywhere. That he's more than a name or a storyline. He's the kind of player who turns pain into purpose and adversity into fuel. And if this is what year one looks like, just wait until he has a full season with stability behind him. A coach who understands him. A locker room that's already rallying around him. He didn't need a perfect start, he just needed a real one. And now he's got it. If you're here for the comeback stories, the ones that go beyond the scoreboard, hit that like button. Drop a comment with your favorite moment from Shedeur's season. And if you're ready to watch this journey unfold, make sure you're subscribed. The best parts haven't even started yet.